we're delighted to be joined by the UK Energy and Climate Minister Gregory Barker from London. Minister, thank you very much for speaking with us. You've been doing some very interesting work in the sphere of energy and climate change. So let me begin with climate change right away. I read somewhere that you've set a very ambitious task of generating almost 17 gigawatts in 7 years in solar power alone, going from 2.7 gigawatt to 20 gigawatt by 2020. Now that's a very ambitious task, and it seems to set the standards for what can be done in the context of climate change, and particularly from a government point of view. Can you tell us more about this and how you're driving this initiative?
Renewables, not just for solar. We are the world leader in offshore wind. We have huge opportunities for biomass, for hydro, for renewable CHP. So there's a lot going on here in the UK in the renewable sector, but solar in particular is very exciting. It's come from a very low start, and we've added nearly 2.5 gigawatts in the last 2 years under this government, and it's very exciting. Now, it's absolutely true. I do have a very big ambition for solar, which potentially could reach 20 gigawatts by the early years of the next decade. But it's an ambition, it's not a formal target. But that ambition is predicated on continuing to drive down the costs of solar. And the reason that I think solar is so popular and that we can have these sorts of ambition with real credibility is that the prices are continuing to come down at a rate of knots. Yes, we've seen the price falls slow over the last year, but I think if you look at the long-term technological development of this technology over the next 5 years or so, we can expect some further dramatic price falls, to the point where solar is challenging fossil fuels for grid parity. And at that point, a really big level of deployment, such as 20 gigawatts here in the UK, becomes eminently sensible and financially viable. But what we're not going to do is to deploy at large-scale technologies that remain too expensive. We've learned those lessons from pioneers elsewhere around the world. So we're very mindful of the impact on the consumer, but solar is very exciting.
Right, and I'm going to come to India in a bit, but let me put another question to you. You know, output at the North Sea has been falling, and I read that oil and gas production is down 22%. And so you have that on one end, and you have your ambitious plans in solar and in wind and other forms of alternate energy in the other. Can you sort of add all this up for us?
Well, we are on track to produce 15% of our total energy needs from renewables by 2020, and that's 30% of our electricity. So we've got a big ambition here. We've still got a lot to do. You know, the UK is a big industrialised economy, and that means that we've really got to step up the level of deployment. That is why the current government, led by David Cameron, has reformed the UK energy markets to make it more attractive to international investors and create long-term stability for new entrants into this market who are looking to put money, particularly into offshore wind. And I'm glad to say that in a publication by Ernst & Young last week, they rated the UK as the most attractive place anywhere in the world, number 1 in offshore wind, and 4th up from 5th in terms of the overall most attractive place to invest in renewables generally. So we're clearly doing some things right. We've obviously got some stiff competition around the world, but we also have a lot of companies here who are looking for opportunities to invest in India and see huge potential for a whole range of renewable technologies in the subcontinent.
Right. So, and you talked about India, and you talked about the rest competition in other parts of the world. So, how do you take this whole argument out to the rest of the world? Because climate change, at least from a layman's point of view, is really a global problem. It's not just a UK problem or an India problem.
Sure, it is a global problem that requires a global response. That's why progress in the UNFCCC negotiations are so critical, and why the agreement at Durban 2 years ago by the world's leaders to agree a new global treaty by 2015 for implementation by 2020 is so crucial, and why it's important that when we meet in Warsaw in November for the next climate change conference, that we make real progress towards that 2015 deadline. We can't repeat the mistakes of Copenhagen in 2009 and leave it all to the last minute. So we need a sensible progression and a clear roadmap through to 2015. And India is going to be a vital partner in ensuring that we reach that destination.
Minister, what are your own views about, and this is a more general question to start with, your views about countries like India and China and what they've been doing in the area of climate change and bringing about greater carbon efficiency?
Well, I think you have to recognize that India and China may have huge populations, may be the economies of tomorrow, may have strong growth, may have huge potential, but they are very different when it comes to carbon intensity and climate change impacts. The fact of the matter is emissions per capita in China are now higher than those in France. China has developed world carbon emissions per capita, but India, on the other hand, has a fraction of the emissions per capita of developed countries. And the dialogue that we're having with India should in no way be interpreted as an attempt to constrain India's growth. On the contrary, I think a more resource-efficient, sustainable form of growth, which is less fossil fuel intensive, which is more energy efficient, which is more resource efficient, so requiring less inputs across the board, particularly being more water efficient, drawing less natural commodities into the supply chain. Right. These are really important issues for an economy like India, which is set to grow at a phenomenal rate right the way through the century, which is going to see a big increase in domestic living standards, but has this huge population growth. You're only going to be able to square all of these things if there's a big focus on resource efficiency. And so we need to make sure that the prosperity agenda, the growth agenda, and the low carbon agenda go hand in hand. And I think here, India, unlike China, has a huge advantage because frugal development is actually in the DNA of the Indian economy. Indian entrepreneurs understand how to create value out of very little. That's one of their great expertise, and it's going to be an increasingly valuable skill set, the ability to engineer, design in, added value, but with fewer inputs. And so I think there's a big synergy, a natural fit, in fact, between many of the entrepreneurs and investors that we have in the UK and many of the great Indian companies and some of their newer disruptive entrepreneurs as well, to come together and collaborate and find mutually interesting opportunities. We've certainly benefited here in the UK from some phenomenal investment and growth by Indian companies. We're seeing that happen from British companies going into India. But there is a new opportunity that I'm working with my Indian counterparts. That is for the UK to sponsor the Mumbai-Bangalore economic corridor and to make that huge area of development actually a global exemplar for resource efficient, energy efficient, sustainable development. Not a sort of Potemkin village showcase of what might be achieved if you spend enough money, but a real world, hard-nosed example of creating value using fewer inputs and as a result being much more resource efficient and of course more climate friendly.
Right, and are there any specific steps that you're looking at or any specific areas of collaboration that you would be looking at in the next year or so or in coming months in the context of the Indo-British initiative?
Well, it is this opportunity of the Bangalore-Mumbai economic corridor. We have just nearly finished finalising the terms of reference for the feasibility study that was jointly sponsored by the Indian government, of course, and the United Kingdom. We are identifying new exciting sources of major finance for this project. We are bringing together an unprecedented collaboration of entrepreneurs and industrialists, both from India, but also many of the fantastic experts that we have here in the UK in low carbon innovation that are real global leaders. And I think this project will be of such a size that it will flip the dial, not just for India, but for international low carbon development.
Right.
I think we're really very, very excited about it, and it's consuming a lot of time, interest, and energy.
Right. Minister, let me ask you a more general question. How do you make an issue like climate change an important part of political and civil discourse and debate in the country like the UK, or potentially in countries like India?
Well, it's a challenge. Since Copenhagen in 2009, when the world failed to agree a clear way forward, there's been a feeling that climate change has slipped down the agenda, pushed further down by the economic and financial pressures in developed economies, and now those same pressures felt, albeit to a lesser degree, in developing economies as well. So we have to recalibrate the arguments for climate action to be absolutely certain that they are compatible with both growth and value for money. I think if you go back a few years, there was a slightly lazy assumption that provided the end was laudable, that you didn't have to worry too much about the cost of a policy or the constraint that it had on economic growth. Now we have to be really clear that the sorts of policy that are going to work are those that work shoulder to shoulder with growth, that rather constrain growth, actually underpin growth, that drive prosperity rather than act as a brake. And that requires further innovation, technological innovation, new ways of working, new business models, and it also requires governments to be much more disciplined in the way that they spend taxpayers' money or create policy that consumers are going to have to pay for. So greater financial rigour, a much greater sense of urgency when it comes to commercialising new technology, and an imperative to scale up quicker.
Minister, last question. Is there something that you've, more perhaps anecdotally, that you've seen or witnessed in your term as in climate and energy change that has sort of left a very strong impression on you and perhaps convinced you about the need to focus on alternate energy and the whole issue of climate change even more strongly?
Sorry, just say that again. I didn't quite get that question.
Yeah. So my question was, is there something that you've seen, or is there an anecdote that you can share with us? Something that has really convinced you about the need for all of us to focus on the issue of climate change and the issue of alternate energy, for instance. I mean, really things that are going to affect us and our future generations.
Well, I have to say, for me, there's been no light bulb moment. I've been maybe it's because I'm a slow learner, but it's been a gradual journey, starting when I first came into Parliament in 2001 and served on the Environmental Parliamentary Committee. But I guess for me, perhaps one of those seminal moments was when I went with David Cameron to the Arctic in 2006 and saw for myself the great gaping holes where formerly huge glaciers were, vast expanses of Arctic Sea where there were formerly ice caps. And that really drove home to me the way in which our world is physically changing, in the same way that we see deserts relentlessly marching south in Africa, the way that we see extreme weather events right the way around the world, whether it's hurricanes in North America or whether it's drought or monsoon in India. Very difficult to pin any individual weather event onto climate change, but I think taken together, there are clear signs that we have to take this problem seriously.
Right, Minister. Thank you so much for speaking with us.
Pleasure.